You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Joint Legislative Management Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, December 11th. We have on the agenda today the legislative budgets to review, and then we're going to get an update from the Sergeant at Arms office on the building and as we prep for January. Just a quick update that the staff are continuing to review the political activity draft policy that we have been looking at. So that's continuing to evolve. That will come back to this committee at some point in the new year. So just wanted to give you an update on that. And so why don't we jump in and bring Scott Moore and Catherine Benham up to give us a walkthrough on the legislative budget memo. Thank you. Sure, sounds good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I did send you all copies of the memo. I do have hard copies here if anyone needs one. If you don't have one, I'm happy to share one.
That's why.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, sorry.
So, for the record, Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. Good morning.
Good morning.
I've spent the past couple of months working with all the different department heads crafting this budget from the bottom up, basically. So before we get into the memo, I'd like to just point out a couple things. One of the things that we did was any chance we could, we level funded a line item from last year. And every chance we could, we decreased a line items if there's an opportunity to do so. So with that in mind, I'd like to go through the memo. Is that in front of you? The first page shows that the FY25 legislative branch budget was $22,427,405. And what this current proposal for FY26 does is bring it up to $24,026,591. That's a dollar change increase of not quite $1.6 million, which represents an increase of 7.13%. We also went through all of the different one-time appropriations that are 2 years or more, 2 years or older, to see if there's any programs still out there, any one-time appropriation money left over for anything. And we did find $121,000 in money for one-time appropriations that we thought we could revert, get back to the general fund. And if you do so, that brings the total increase down to 6.59%. In the bottom paragraph, you'll see the main part of the growth of the budget is basically personnel costs. The pay act was 6.4%, and the corresponding increases to retirements, FICA, Medicare, all the other things that are based upon the salaries. Add them all together, it's about 90% of this increase. So of the 1.6 million increase, 90% is because of pay act and other personal things, which does leave about 10% in other increases for other items such as increase in dues, there might be expenses, things like that. We turn to the second page. One of the things I did want to talk about was this fiscal year staffing request. Last year, we had 4 new positions, if you will. We converted a sergeant, regular police officer to a sergeant position. We converted 2 law clerks to a 1 full-time year-round position. During the budget process last year, that law clerk position for 1 full year exempt position was not actually budgeted. Instead, the funding was allocated for the attorneys themselves, and this 1 position was left unfunded. In going through and talking again with the departments to see what we could do to make sure that we were budget conscious, but also serving the needs of what we needed, we felt that this law clerk position could be a 9-month position instead of a year-round position. And so therefore we're asking that we fund that for 9 months. And doing that for 9 months instead of a year saves about $23,000. So with that said, the main budget pressures, the compensation and benefit changes, 6.4% salary increase from the annual pay act does have a corresponding impact on lots of different things. Everything that's built upon percentages from the salary would then go up as well. The increased payroll tax, it's not a pressure because it's a very small increase. It goes from 0.0033 to 0.0044%. So it's small, but I did want to point it out because last year it was new. So for this fiscal year 25, it's a new tax. Next year, it'll still be new. So it's less of a budget pressure and more. I wanted to make sure people were aware that it's still there. It's still relatively new. Legislative expense reimbursements. The GSA increases, well, they published their rates October 1st. It increases rooms and meals about $10 a day. Once we add that in for the session, as well as off-session expenses, for all of the different legislators, it does add up. Then
And how much,
Sorry, Senator Mitchell, go ahead.
so how much, in other words, the breakdown of the 1.6 million increase? I would assume, expense reimbursement, what does that come to out of that 1.6?
It's about 300,000.
300,000, okay. I don't have it here.
I didn't provide that breakdown of each individual item.
But some, obviously a big compensation benefit changes would be a big one, but,
Yeah.
I was just wondering what that change in the federal rate, about 300, thank you.
So then item number 4 on this page, the contractual obligations. We do have some different departments have 3, 4, 5-year contracts with different consultants. And so FY 26 will be in sometimes the second year, sometimes the third year. A lot of these different contracts do have an increase when we get to the second and third year. So there's some of that. Then,
Sorry, one moment.
I'm sorry.
Linda Shaw?
Did you get all the way through contractual obligations yet, Scott, or?
the only other thing I was going to mention was some of that is influenced by the fact that NCSL is no longer offering some of the services they used to, so we have to go out and find some contracted consultants to do some of the stuff that they used to do for free, say for free, as part of the dues that we paid them. But yes, go ahead.
So in FY 25, we're in now, what was that amount that was in, we had budgeted for previously, and then in FY 26, that amount?
FY 25 for the legislative branch, and let me say this a little bit different. We have the legislature as part of the legislative branch. The legislature is 105,000. And then that would go to 132,000, no, yep, 132,000. And then the JFO, I don't remember what the number was originally, but we're gonna increase by about 36,000 JFO. And those are the main contract obligations we have.
So I think I didn't clearly hear what you said. We have budgeted in FY 26.
So for the legislative branch, 132,000.
132.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it because the legislature keeps asking for more and more and more that you all can't provide?
For the legislature, it is sexual harassment prevention training, diversity training, leadership coaching. There's also the having a labor attorney on retainer for issues of any labor issues that we want to avoid conflicts of interest with our own legislative counsel, as well as having a comp analyst on hand, as well to provide that second set of eyes. And again, avoiding some instances of impropriety because we're doing the comp analyst stuff in-house. We want to make sure we have another person if we need it. So.
Thank you.
The last thing here we did, again, just this law clerk position, pointing out that this position would be about $67,000. So it does have an impact on the overall budget. When you get to the bottom of the page, you see a little chart here. This does show the breakdown of the individual line items. Again, the legislature includes general assembly members, it includes House clerk, Senate secretary, legislative ops, our committee assistants, HR, and our legislative leadership staff. I'm happy to read the numbers to you, but ultimately, when we look at this, we can see the breakdown. The 1.599 number, which is 7.13% increase over FY25. And then again, if we revert to 121 million, we're down to $1.5 million, or 6.59% increase over FY24. Turning to page 3 is the proposed motion. So one other thing I would point out is that historically, the internal service fund numbers, we don't have them built in here yet. So they have not given us updated numbers. With a number of those fee for services, for instance, is built basically on square footage because we have moved things around. I don't yet have a final number. That number that we had built into this budget might go up, it might go down. Historically, we get those numbers for the end of December. So I don't have updated costs here. That happened last year as well, where we received the numbers December 23rd, I think it was. And then we had to update this. Additionally, the current budget instructions for healthcare we're instructed to keep the level of healthcare costs at the same rates that we had last year. If those rates should go up, these numbers would have to change as well.
Thank you, Scott. So members, we'll have 2 motions to discuss. The first one will be regarding the memo that came from my office, making the second position in the speaker's office, a permanent one that is in that budget that was just proposed. So that will be the first question up for discussion. And then after that conversation and possible vote, then we will go to a proposed motion on the budget entirely and have discussion there. So I think Representative Wood, go ahead.
To your first point, Madam Chair, I just want to confirm that the second position in the speaker's office is already included in these numbers?
Correct.
Okay. And then my second question, Scott, is are there any other staffing changes represented in this besides the law clerk?
No, there wouldn't be any other new positions or anything like that. The one nice thing is this budget does show funding for full positions, as in the Sergeant of Arms, finally we're the full staff. So we are complete. We don't have any new positions.
And how many positions do we have in the Capitol Police
I believe, and
FTEs? I mean,
I'd be happy to throw it to Chief Polway. I was gonna say the chief and 6 officers, but it's good that Chief Polway is here to phone a friend.
and that's the same as it was in 25. I don't know what we're going to be seeing. Are we going to be seeing department heads here, or are we just going to be seeing Scott?
Scott, and then if we have questions, we can bring to the table
Okay.
the department head for more
This is
detail.
a slightly different makeup than 25. No, my apologies, 25 is slightly different makeup than 24 because we converted 1 officer to a sergeant. So
Right, I knew we did that in 25. Yeah.
But, and a slightly different makeup only in that back in 24, we did have people. So now there's people in place, whereas in 24, we relied a lot on the sheriff's departments to backfill when we didn't have staff hired.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Representative Shaw, go ahead.
thank you. So to continue the discussion on the Sergeant at Arms office and the police force, are we currently staffed fully, or do we have a vacant position that we're budgeting in for?
I'm not sure when the last officer is starting, but other than
Monday.
starting on Monday, once they start, we'll be fully staffed.
Fully staffed. So we don't have a phantom number in there where hopefully we'll hire somebody else.
No, this is representative of the seven total positions.
Thank you.
Senator Kitchell?
The other position, which was new, and I'm sure it's in here, and that had to do with education, finance in joint fiscal. We only had Julia, who was, really overworked in terms of the amount of analysis and projects and, legislative requests. And so we did add a second position. That was a recommendation, obviously, of our Ways and Means and Finance Committee, recognizing the workload demands. So that second position.
Yeah.
And has that person been hired as well?
Yep.
I thought so.
His name is Desiree Vernies.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I did have one comment, obviously, when you're looking at percentages, and obviously the base that's being increased makes a difference how big that base is in terms of the percentage. And the normal ways that you can bring a budget down is reduce staffing, reduce workload. And one of the things that I would like to point out is the workload increase that I've experienced over the time I've been here. The number of bills, the drafting requests, the complexity of the issues, the demands, the fiscal analysis. We have insatiable demands, and there's only so much we can expect of our workforce. And or you engage in other things, like we could reduce the size of the house, for example. That could save us some money, right? Or we could limit the number of bills that any one legislator can introduce. I mean, those are all things that have been talked about to constrain this unrelenting growth in workload that we've imposed on our staff. And so, in the absence of not wanting to do that, we obviously are having to invest in more resources to bring us more capacity to support this branch of government. And so, while you can say, oh, well, 6.5, the governor wants 3. The reality is the governor's staff negotiated a salary increase of over 6%. And so it's awfully hard unless you go to those areas where reductions are normally accommodated in state government, and that is gigging up vacancy savings, eliminating certain services, constraining whatever. If in the absence of doing that, it seems like this budget is reflective of the work ahead and the resources that we need so that we have staff that can manage the expectations that are being imposed on them. That's only my observation. I won't be here to take up this budget, but unless we want to really go back and revisit some of those prior discussions, it seems like what's being requested here is a reasonable response to the anticipated workload that's going to be ahead of us.
Senator Brock, go ahead.
I just noticed we just finished a legislative briefing, economic briefing about where we stand and where we're going. And just a week ago, and we learned a week ago that the inflation rate nationally was 2.6% over the past 12 months, and announced on the radio this morning it's risen to 2.7%. We're increasing our expenses more than twice that. When you increase, it's always been my experience in business that if you increase what essentially is an overhead expense, you have to figure out, where's the cut going to come someplace else that's going to make up for that. Don't see any of that really discussed at all. I promised at one of the briefings for new legislators, I promised that I was going to give a couple of books to each one of the new members of our caucus, one of which is called Parkinson's Law. And if you're familiar with Parkinson's Law, that's what I see here. Work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. And he came to that conclusion, British academic in Singapore in the 1950s. He came to that conclusion by looking at the British Navy between World War I and World War II. And the classic example was the number of officers and men in the Navy declined, the number of capital ships declined, the number of people working in the shipyards declined, but the number of administrators working in the Admiralty increased. And his posture was that it will continue to increase forever, regardless of the amount of work, if any, to be done. We got a message, at least I heard the message very loudly in the last election. Stop spending. Stop spending more money than you have. And one of the messages that I heard in the economic presentation was that our revenues are going to, for the foreseeable future, remain relatively flat, and there's going to be expense pressure that will rise. I can't support an increase of a penny above inflation rate for the administrative branch, what essentially is the administration of the legislature. I think that would be impossible to defend if you ever got on a stage with the public saying, why are you increasing your expenses at a time when we are faced with all of these pressures? I just don't think it's the right thing to do, and I can't support it for that reason.
Any other questions? Go ahead, President Wood.
I actually would like to, I guess, hear more about the law clerk, position, given the action and the recommendation that was made last year, and then essentially saying, yeah, but, and now we want it back. And, so I think I would love to hear from Bryn about that.
Great. So while Bryn's getting settled in, we can take the time that we need to ask Bryn questions about the Legislative Council budget. And then after we wrap up that conversation, I'd like to move to the motion about the Speaker's office position to just keep the conversation going as we work through the budget. Welcome, Bryn. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. For the record, Bryn Hare, Director and Chief Counsel of Legislative Council. Happy to talk about the request to fund the 9 months of a position within the office.
So, I realized you weren't here when last year's budget was developed, so that's, you're off the hook on that one. But, you're familiar with the fact that folks decided it would be a better investment of the resources and the workload to have a full-time year-round position. And now it feels like, yeah, we want that, and we also want this. And and I'm not exactly sure how you said it was a reduction of 23,000, I think, or something like that, by moving it from a full year to 9 months. So if I had a moment, I could do the calculation and figure out what the total is, but could you also say what the amount that's included in here is?
The amount that's included is 67,150.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
I'm happy to speak to some extent about the decisions that were made last year because I was hired at sort of the end of that conversation. And as this committee well knows, there was quite a bit of turnover within the Office of Legislative Counsel over the last couple of years. And so when I was hired, there were vacancies to fill from that turnover, and there was also the 2 additional positions that were authorized by this committee. So since I started, I have been working on recruitment quite a bit. And I would say that it probably won't come as a surprise to this group because Legislative Council is not the only legal organization that's struggling with recruitment. The Office of the Attorney General, the Defender General's office, there is quite a dearth of attorneys within the state. And we have really struggled with our recruitment efforts. So my request to fund this position is for a couple of reasons. First, I think historically we've had legislative legal clerks within the Office of Legislative Counsel for over 30 years. 7 of the 18 attorneys that are currently in the office were previously legal clerks within the Office of Legislative Counsel. They've always worked really well for our office, and it's been sort of an economical way to relieve some of the burden on the attorneys during the really high volume times of the year. These are typically new law school graduates. Sometimes they are attorneys from out of state. New to Vermont, or sometimes they're attorneys with a different sort of law practice that want to dip their toe into legislative legal work. But essentially, these are attorneys who are capable of handling a small portfolio under the supervision of a more experienced attorney. And it's a really economical way, like I said, of relieving some of the workload during the session. But so it's always worked well and been important for our office for that reason. But I see the other really important reason to maintain the law clerk position is that it creates a pipeline of candidates for our office when we have a vacancy. When we, like I said, we've had a number of attorneys to hire. I've only been able to recruit and hire 1. And I think that having this law clerk position is just a really important way to create a pool of candidates that our office can draw from when we have an inevitable vacancy within our office. So my request is really based on the historical nature of how well it's worked for our office to have a law clerk, but also to continue to have this really important pipeline between Vermont Law School, and other areas and our office.
Thank you. Can I just ask one
Yes,
follow-up?
go ahead.
So, does, the detailed budget, Scott, contain any budgeted vacancy savings?
The budget includes full staffing, so it would not.
So no. Thank you.
All right, so we have Representative Shaw and then Senator Kitchell.
Morning, Rick.
Good morning.
So same question for you that I had for the Sergeant at Arms office. Is your staff currently, of attorneys, currently full?
No.
Or you have, how many open positions?
We have 2 vacancies at the moment that we are working to recruit. In fact, there's an interview happening right now. So we are actively in recruitment for those positions. It's likely that we will only be able to fill one of them prior to the session, or actually prior to the end of the fiscal year.
End of the fiscal year of FY 25.
Yes.
Right. Okay, would you be, I'll ask you, and maybe not a fair question for you, on a financial area, is it necessary if you have literally very little hope of hiring that second attorney, is it wise to continue to have that money in your budget? Or would you be willing to work with the legislature and think about if you can find somebody during budget adjustment, correcting it in 26, so to fund that position?
So my understanding is that that position is funded in FY 26. And so if the question is whether or not we would be willing to amend this year's budget to.
I guess we're talking about the FY 26.
Yeah. So I think that I would like it to remain funded. I feel quite certain that I will be able to fill that position. My focus has really shifted because we're so close to the session. If I could continue to focus on recruitment, I would, but that's not going to be the focus for the next several months. So I feel certain I will be able to fill that position.
And I certainly understand your workload, and especially after hearing Senator Kitchell's talk. And I do understand that members sometimes get overzealous, especially the first year of the biennium. And I understand that, but I also have to understand that we're looking at a 7.1% increase before reversions, and I don't count reversions. I count that as money, found money. So thank you for that.
Senator Kitchell.
Well, I did want to talk about the workload, and you're coming back. You obviously can speak to that. It's sort of like I said, we all suffer from this neurological condition. I want it, but it shouldn't cost me anything. And if we want to have the workload and the response that legislators expect or need to do their work, can you just speak to us what, from your perspective, what the workload demands are? And basically this is to give you additional resources, but in a cost-effective way. So you obviously have thought about why this is necessary and what has been the experience in terms of what you're hearing from your staff around workload expectations and the capacity to address them.
Absolutely. And I think that this committee probably had this conversation last year when the 2 additional attorney positions were authorized. But, when I came, this was sort of my understanding of why I was hired to some extent, was to address some of the morale issues within the Legislative Council. I think the significant turnover in attorneys in what has historically been an office that retains its counsel for quite a long time was a little bit of a wake-up call for the leadership in our office about what the morale really looked like within our legal group. So the first thing I did when I was hired was to talk to everybody within all of the lawyers in the office about their perceptions of the expectations on them during session. I also talked to all of the attorneys who left. And the sort of widespread unanimous sentiment among those attorneys was that the workload is growing year after year. Especially the attorneys who've been here for quite a long time can attest that the expectations on them during the session have grown exponentially. And that is probably for a number of reasons. including, the sort of members really have access to attorneys 24 hours a day now with the smartphones. So I think there's a number of reasons that expectations have increased, but, the attorneys within Office of Legislative Counsel are wonderful. They are humans and they have families. And, I think that the pressures on them during session are sometimes unsustainable, which has led to some turnover in recent years.
Thank you.
Senator Brock, go ahead.
Just to continue with that discussion, are there things that this group here or the legislature as a whole could do to better manage what they do in order to relieve some of the pressures that your attorneys are facing?
So as I think Senator Kitchell indicated earlier, there are certainly rule changes that you could make to limit the number of bills introduced. That's never been something that our office has advocated for. I don't think that's not really what we're here to do. And our goal is always to meet the expectations of our clients, no matter what they are. And so I would suggest that it really is up to you to think about whether or not you want to impose those limits on yourself. I would just offer that even if there are limits on the number of bills any one single member could introduce, there are ways of sort of getting around those limits by introducing, omnibus bills. So yes, that's certainly something that you all could consider doing. And we would be happy to support you in your consideration of those rule amendments.
Senator Brock, those are conversations that happen in your Senate Rules Committee and our House Rules Committee. I know we've had many conversations about changing the dates in which people can do bill requests. We have on the House side had conversations about possibly limiting the amount of bills, but there are some First Amendment issues with that we've come across. So I think that is a conversation I would urge both committees to look at. Are there ways to help streamline better? I know another example is we've said, someone puts in a bill request for something that other people have already put in request, and Legislative Council help facilitate an introduction if someone is interested and willing to do that. So there have been some strategies, but that is a conversation that can be ongoing about it. For sure.
I think it's an important conversation to have, and it's an important conversation to have. And I don't mean to be repetitive, but we can't continue to increase expenses at twice the rate of inflation forever without any means of trying to control it.
But that ties back to what we negotiate in our labor contracts.
Oh, that's certainly-
And I guess we could say, we don't want to tie ourselves to what other state employees and, if the administration negotiates a contract of over 6%, which is what we're confronting with, do we say, well, we're not going to treat state employees in this branch differently? The other, I guess we could say, we're not going to connect, we will set up a separate reimbursement for legislators, that the federal scale is too generous. Maybe we should reduce that and increase the existing only by the rate of inflation. And those are the kinds of decisions that we can make. And obviously out of the budget, certainly the big money is in the legislature. And so those are interesting choices. But it's very hard when we don't control what is negotiated on the part of the administration with all the other thousands of state employees. And I guess this is a message maybe to the administration.
It's a message to everyone. And it may well be also a message to us, even to call it a commitment from legislative leadership, that they recognize that if this passes, is going to be money that's going to have to come from someplace, and to look for getting it from some other place, such as cost savings elsewhere, and what the legislative leadership may commit to supporting in order to make up this difference. But to continue to do this with no control or no goal other than to meet this cost, I think this is unsupportable to the public.
I wouldn't at all say it's no control and no goal. To go back to what Bryn said, and the speaker can back me up on this, I'm sure. The complaints that were coming into our office from Ledge Council and JFO about workload were, greater than anything I've ever experienced since we've been here. And when you think about what we're queuing up for the next year, we're talking about major changes to education finance and perhaps to the healthcare system. Those are the most complicated areas to model, to draft legislation in. So the workload was going to be larger. That was going to be true no matter what. But the morale problems were very real, and we were facing multiple, the need to replace multiple people simultaneously. So this seems to me, it's not ideal, but it is in line with what the administration negotiated in the contract, and it's not much beyond that. So I feel like all the way around, it's necessary, but it's targeted. It's not just an aimless expansion unto forever.
I don't want to monopolize the discussion. I think I made the point that I hope to make, and it's not that I'm thinking that the folks who are asking for this are asking something that from their perspective is unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. And I understand the reasons why, but our answers are the same answers that we've been giving for years. If we look at education funding, what are we on, the 34th or 35th study? Each of which was going to make some major change and took a lot of work to get to where it was, and we're doing it again. But what we're doing in the process is we're increasing administrative expenses. We're doubling the rate of inflation of administrative expenses, and it's never going to stop unless we do something different right now, such as not continuing to do it, and also committing to, if we do it, because we find that the necessity is so important to do, that we commit to getting the money back from the savings someplace else.
Representative Shaw, go ahead.
I think excuse me, I need to mention this. I did ask Scott to give me a breakdown on some of the various budgets that are within the entire overall budget. And I think we as a committee, or we as a group, are not informing our members what it costs to run this institution. And I think it's important, which may help if people knew in the body how much it costs to introduce a bill. Just introduce one bill. What's the cost of that? And when you multiply that by 11, 12, 13, 1400, you got some real money. Scott broke down just the legislative budget request of this year of about $12.2 million for me. And I was astounded because don't remember seeing this breakdown before. Just base salaries of $3 million for members. Expenses were somewhere in the range of almost $3 million. Various payroll taxes, et cetera, were in that same range. Just members alone, just to have our members walk in the building is about $6.3 million. And I don't think people understand exactly what it costs to turn the lights on. That doesn't include anything for the all famous fee for space that we also pay to the administration of $1.3 million to heat and light, maintain the building. So those are areas that, and there are many other areas that make our whole budget up as the legislature, the clerk's office, secretary of Senate Secretary's office, the leadership staff, committee staff, ledge operations, HR, a little disturbed with the HR budget of about, we say about $615,000. I think that's, but I hope that includes some training for the legislature. But I'm not sure about that. There's a lot of variables that I'm not sure of, but it might behoove the membership to understand just what it costs to put your key in the door and walk in the building. And then people might have a little bit of a feel about, I'm going to introduce this bill. Am I going to, I need IT help. I always need IT help, so I'm okay with that, but to run this place, and I think we make a mistake by not letting bringing people in and letting them know what we're facing here today. A budget of, a lot of millions of dollars, $23 million. And that's the first time I heard the budget alone, it was nowhere near 22, but it was still an astounding number.
Yeah.
And, we're all members, and I think everybody's responsible for a piece of this budget.
That's a good point.
We're beginning to sound like the school boards now, and I'm not just dumping on the school board, but they're going the same conversation now. How do we get our budget down and not increase staff?
Mhm.
And I don't think it's going.
Well, it requires restructurings, but that gets into my, do we want to restructure ourselves? And those are very, a prior speaker suggested the House could be made smaller. Those are very difficult decisions. And so much of the resources are driven by those decisions. Some are study committees. I have been like a, dog on a bone to limit the number of study committees. Because it's not just the cost of the legislative time, but it's the resources of our staff that have to go in to write reports, many of which unfortunately never get acted on. Or somebody said, study committee is giving you the booby prize. I'm giving you something in reality because I can't give you money. So I do think there needs to be a greater understanding of the decisions or the legislation that brings that kind of work to the staff. And it's awfully hard to say, we want to continue doing everything we want and expect we're going to do it on the backs of our staff that have, we've already seen what happens when you bring people to the brink and we lose them. And we haven't added a lot of chiefs. All we've added is as staff, to line workers. I mean, so I do think it's not as though we've added, a lot more executive level staff in joint fiscal. It's Catherine and everybody below her, and same for years. But we have added more analysts and work because of the workload pressure. And if we lost Julia, what a loss that would be. And we were at the point of doing that. So to me, we have a lot of discussion ahead of us. People do need to understand more. And I suspect that there are parts of state government that in fact are exceeding that 3% for a variety of reasons. Overall, they might bring it in. I don't know what it'll look like, but I suspect just like within all of the executive branch, they've got to have 6%. Some entities have greater capacity to adjust my reductions. So they've got a lot more to spread it over than we have here, but, so it's an interesting discussion and I'll wish you well.
All right, does anyone have any more questions for Bryn? Okay, thank you very much. All right, well then I would like to move to our first motion if possible, Senator Brew.
And I will just say that I support this wholeheartedly. I think the Speaker's office has had huge responsibilities over the last couple of years, bringing in new members. So I would move that we make the position number 12-731 permanent in the Speaker's office.
Well, we don't need a second, but I will if you want.
No,
I would like to second because I believe in it, but.
thank you for the sentiment. All right, thank you for the motion. Are there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Senator Baruch,
Yes?
Senator Brock,
No.
Senator Kashim,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Representative James, here, Representative Shaw,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes,
and I am a yes, motion carries.
I think Representative James is on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she just popped back. Representative
oh.
James, can you hear me? Representative James, you can vote. if you can hear us.
If you can't hear us, you
Yeah,
can't.
there-
Hi, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Phew, I'm
Kath-
so sorry
have you
about
heard-
that. I vote yes.
Okay, thank you. So the motion carries, 7-1. Thank you. So let's now move to the second motion at hand on the larger budget question. Senator Bruce?
And in this case, I would move to support the proposed fiscal year 2026 legislative branch appropriations as presented to the Joint Legislative Management Committee on December 11, 2024, and require that the Joint Fiscal Office notify the chair and vice chair of any substantial changes prior to the release of the executive branch budget recommendation to determine whether formal review by the committee is necessary.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm interested in that last, the last, part of that, how substantial is defined.
I'm gonna ask Catherine to come up.
Catherine Benham, Joint Fiscal Office. In my mind, the internal service funds, those will definitely be changes and assuming that we get the revenue that matches them, I would not if the revenue and the spending are gonna match, which is often what happens with the administration, I would not consider that substantial, but it would be up to the chair and vice chair to decide that. If there were some other things that were surprises, that would be, I think, when we would come back to you all. So the numbers will be different in the final budget when you get it from the governor because of these other changes, but I don't expect them to be fiscal impacts that will affect us in terms of drawing down revenue than we have coming in.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Kitchell.
The other is, this motion is to support it. It doesn't mean that in the committee process that there won't be more testimony and perhaps some changes that would make in that process. So as I read this,
That's right.
it's as it's being proposed, but it doesn't mean that in fact, this is necessarily what will end up in the budget.
That's correct. Any other questions for Catherine? Thank you, Catherine. Any further discussion? Okay, looking at the screen, I don't see any hands.
Do you have a second to the motion?
You don't need a second,
Oh,
but thank you. All right. I'm not seeing any hands. I'm gonna call the roll. Senator Baruch,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
No.
Senator Hashim,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
yes.
Representative James,
Yes.
Representative Shaw.
No.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Motion carries 6-2. Thank you for that. I just want to thank the staff for all their hard work putting these budgets together. I know it was not easy and you worked hard to find savings as well. Really appreciate your hard work. And we will keep the committee informed if there are any changes or anything that needs to come back for discussion. Thank you. So now we're going to move to bringing up our Sergeant at Arms, Agatha, to give us a building update. Welcome, Agatha.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Agatha Cutler, Sergeant at Arms. And I've asked a couple people to be in the audience in case there are additional questions that I can't answer. So I'd like to just quickly recognize John Hebert from O&M at BGS, Jim DeSisto, Tricia Harper, who's a consultant for the State House, David Sheets, and Chief Polway are here in case there are additional questions. So I'm prepared to give an update on the building and other Sergeant at Arms projects as we move forward to the 2025 session. All right. Mike, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing the PowerPoint?
It is posted to the committee's website and coming up on the screen now.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with probably what's I would call the most important project as it affects legislative operations, the legislature and the committees, which is the mezzanine project. The estimated move-in is January 20th. We were hoping for a mid-December, but it just did not happen based on supplies, based on schedules, based on all kinds of things. But That is actually not a bad date considering the amount of work that's going on in the mezzanine. It is a complete renovation. The upper left-hand corner is a picture of what will be a new committee room. So that used to be 3 separate offices and a bathroom. You can kind of visualize it. Michelle was the corner office there. So these committee rooms will be large. They'll be bigger, the biggest house committee rooms, apart from whichever committee ends up in room 9. The project, I'm happy to report, is on budget. The contractor is HB Cummings, and Trisha Harper, our consultant, has been working very closely with HB Cummings to make sure this project is executed as close on time as possible and on budget. We have run into some, I call them ups and downs of the projects, things we were not expecting as we dug into the walls. But there were some benefits as well. We discovered that in order to put the bathrooms in on the mezzanine, we thought we were going to have to dig through a substantial amount of ground to make that happen, and we did not need to do that. So the team was able to figure out how to avoid that. Some of the downs, which are actually ups in the budget, some of the things that we were not expecting had to do with IT. We worked with Kevin to figure out how to get essentially service to the offices down the road. So like on the turret side, closer to the speaker side, we had to invest an additional $16,000 to make sure that the offices on the other side of the building were not affected by this work. We've had to do some reworks on soffits, reworks on doors, reworks on plumbing, but all of that said, we're still coming in on budget. So are there any questions about the mezzanine project? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. It's great to hear that it's on budget. And we're maybe 10 or 12 days past start date, which is pretty remarkable considering HVAC, supply chain, blah, blah, blah. With that said, if I'm remembering right, there were, Mike Ferrand's team was gonna move into the touchdown spaces or the office spaces down closer to the speaker. Is that still happening in advance of the committees going in, or will they all go in together?
So the goal is to get those 3 offices up and running before session starts. So Mike's brought on a new employee and he's been very gracious about training that new employee kind of around the building. But the idea is to get those 3 offices up and running as soon as possible. The office that Jen Carby used to be in, which will now be Mike's office, it's the first office that touches the new committee rooms. That room actually needs to have a fan coil installed. There's still some mechanical work that needs to happen in that office, and that provides downflow for the rest of the offices. But to answer your question, the idea is to get them in sooner, as soon as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I will mention that the mezzanine has not been updated since the 80s. And as a result, there were some major upgrades that were required for HVAC and the sprinkler. And I mention it because this project, the construction cost of this project is just a little bit over $1 million. This committee saw that, saw that estimate, but it does include, upwards of $300,000 worth of projects that we would call that are directly related to HVAC that would have needed to happen, and to the sprinkler system that would have needed to happen. So just to call that out.
And so BGS, as I understood it, was ultimately going to be responsible for those costs.
For at least for the HVAC component.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that, I guess I can jump to the sprinkler system, which is not necessarily a project, but I want to flag it for this group because the sprinkler system has been giving us a lot of trouble this off session. So if you've been in the building, you may have been here when the alarm has gone off. I think it's gone off no less than 6 times in the last 2 months. It's incredibly disruptive to the building. It has happened when we've had committees in the building. And I don't want to call them false alarms because they're not false alarms. The system is actually being activated, although there is no fire. So that's why it is in some way a false alarm, but the system is is activated and the pipes, and I'm getting a little bit outside of my lane by talking about this complicated sprinkler system, and that's why BGS is here if there are additional questions. But it's a dry system, which means that all the pipes in the building are empty until the system is activated, and then water flows, and it flows fast. And it's flowing fast through old pipes, 40-year-old pipes that have corrosion. And what has happened in the off session is those pipes have burst. So the hallway where the copy room is was completely flooded. It was about a month ago. I can't remember the exact date, but I'm looking over here because the team was here until midnight and later cleaning up, and then having the sprinkler system technicians come in and fix it as soon as possible. But it deactivated that whole hallway where the copy room is, which is exactly the hallway that we need for people with disabilities to come into the building. Thankfully, no artwork was seriously damaged. Tony from the copy room was able to save many of the materials, but it's not insignificant that this sprinkler system is starting to fail in systems. And I mention this because if it fails or there's a false alarm during session, we will evacuate the building. We will treat it as if it's a full emergency and evacuate the building. I'd like to say we have the full support of BGS. They've been very cooperative. This is their wheelhouse, is the sprinkler system. They've made many creative tweaks to the system, and are working very diligently to make sure that that does not happen during session. Representative Shaw.
Thank you. When we were, and this may be futuristic, when we were contemplating an addition, whichever phase this committee and others decides to go, there was some sprinkler work involved with that for some newish systems for the two chambers. Has there been any contemplation about fixing some of the existing pipes that are severely corroded within that addition piece?
Not with the expansion project, but I would say that if the sprinkler system continues to be problematic, that it might be best to call in BGS and ask them what the plan is to address these pipes that we know are aging and we know are failing. I do know that they have replaced a pipe out in front of the cafeteria. They've replaced a pipe in the mechanical room that's next to the Capitol Police office, and they've replaced that pipe outside the copy room. But with that said, there's still many, many more pipes in the building, some of which are behind sheetrock. So those, if you don't mind, are those three major pipes that have been replaced? Sprinkler pipes, copy room, cafeteria, and mechanical room?
Yes.
Yes.
All of the sprinkler pipe in the mechanical room and on the first floor has been replaced.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then on to HVAC. So when you come back in 2025, or when you don't come back in 2025, there will be new air in the House and Senate chambers, Lieutenant Governor and the Governor's office, the Cedar Creek room, Capitol Police office, rooms 9, 10, 11. It's chilly in here. This is being turned on tomorrow for the first time in months. And in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, brand new air. I've never heard the phrase HVAC so many times as becoming Sergeant at Arms. I'm blown away by how complicated this system is. It's like putting together a puzzle, and the work that's being done is really incredible and very thoughtful, and you'll be coming back to new air in all of those spaces.
Representative Wood?
Yes.
New air,
New air system.
I understand what you mean. I think everybody knows that it's the heating and cooling and all the HVAC system is building is,
Temperamental.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but, usually things are just like, kind of chilly like it is now, or it's too hot to manage and we're opening windows and the controls in individual, like committee rooms, like in my room, don't really seem to have any impact, to be perfectly honest, about controlling anything in the room, whether it's the fan or the temperature. And is that going to be different? Or should we just say, you know, that's really not doing anything and it's controlled some other place in this massive building?
I would say, it will be better, but not perfect, and still dressed in layers, because this building is very hard to control the temperature. My understanding is that there will be more settings for VGS to manage the temperature remotely. So right now, the technician, his name is Mark, he comes and he has to, like, if for using the house, for example, if the house is too hot or too cold, he comes and he manually changes the temperature. So this new system would allow some of that to be done remotely and more precisely. But the committee rooms themselves will still, in all the spaces, it still will be temperamental, especially that time during the year when the heat plant turns off, where it's still on, even though it's hot outside. The springtime is a very hard time to regulate the temperature in the building. So you hopefully will see some improvements, but certainly it won't solve all of the problems of heating this very old building. So some additional projects, we were appropriated money to replace all of the chairs in the cafeteria. And this wasn't just to replace good chairs. This was because are not enough chairs in the cafeteria. We lost a lot of chairs in the flood. So those chairs are scheduled to arrive next week. And as a cost savings, instead of replacing all the tables, we figured out that I partnered with David Sheets in the curator's office, and we refinished the tables, the majority of the tables that are in the cafeteria. We did purchase some new tables, but for the most part, what you'll be seeing are refinished tables, because those tables were actually pretty sturdy and in good shape. So that's already happened. And that project is coming in under budget.
Agatha,
Yes.
I'm not sure if I heard you right. Did you say you bought new tables anyway, even though you refinished the old ones?
So we kept a little combination. We kept all of the tables that have the white top, the white formica with the oak trim. We kept those and refinished them. Then there are some tables that are square shaped that are all wood, they were in bad shape, and we replaced those with new tables. So it'll be a combination. We tried to match the new tables with the old tables as much as possible. But it should feel like a refreshed cafeteria. All right, we'll go to the next slide. 2 Aiken has been fully renovated. That was a very long project. We got the certificate of occupancy in August, I believe, and Ledge Council has moved in, and Bryn has outfitted it with a combination of old furniture and new furniture. A common theme in all of this, and this is apropos of the conversation you just had, is we are working really hard to reuse as much as we possibly can, and not spend money where it doesn't need to be spent. And our partners at JFO are really good at reminding us that there is not a limitless well of money. So I want to just emphasize that we are trying to very hard walk that talk. So 2 Aiken's online, and I want to kind of just emphasize, and if you want to help spread the word as much as you can, that there has been an enormous amount of disruption to staff this summer and fall. I think not one office, with the exception of maybe the House, with the exception of the Senate Secretary's office, every single office has experienced a move, or their office needed to be repainted, or their carpet needed to be replaced. Every single office has experienced some sort of disruption, and everyone has been incredibly patient and understanding. So IT had a major move from 9 Baldwin to 133. Legislative Council had a major move from taking staff out of 1 Baldwin and the State House and moving into 2 Aiken. Drafting operations, it will completely move. And drafting operations, I just want to say, is probably going to be the one office in all of these moves that will have the least amount of opportunity to revisit the State House and the work that they do. So they're going to be at 2 Aiken now, but they don't testify in committee, and they don't necessarily meet with legislators. So they're going to be at 2 Aiken and hopefully coming over to the State House as much as they can to engage and interact. But Drafting operations will have a big change in the way that they do their work. Legislative operations has moved. Mike's office is now where the chief of police sits. I want to thank Mike for being open to that arrangement, because allowing the chief of police to have a private place to meet with his staff, with members, has been transformational. But the Capitol Police are still in room 29 by the elevator. They haven't moved. Human Resources, one of their employees moved as part of this. Joint Fiscal had some of their staff move. So almost every single office has had an impact this summer. I think it's somehow unprecedented. So just to kind of flag that for you. In addition, we're having the House Clerk's office. That's a picture of the House Clerk's office. It may be unrecognizable, the lower left-hand corner. That picture was taken this morning. That's usually where Nigel sits in that corner. So they're having their office repainted and their carpet replaced. It was necessary for their carpet to be replaced. That's actually been a project that needed to happen long ago. All right, we can move to the next slide. So now moving into out of building projects and more into just kind of Sergeant at Arms. This is not an exhaustive list, but happy to report with the Capitol Police. And it's already been mentioned today, they're fully staffed. Recruitment is the number one most important thing that any agency can do for their department. We are not like selling a product here. We are our people and their skills and their talents and their personalities. And I want to credit the chief and the Capitol Police Department for working very hard to recruit some exceptional new officers. And so the 7th will start on Monday, and his name is My Wing, and he comes from the Burlington Police Department. He's a lieutenant in the Burlington Police Department.
Good move.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I was just gonna say, sorry about that. I just wanted to mention, because I spend quite a bit of time here in the summer and fall, and to you and to the chief that.
I'm sorry, can I ask whoever's phone is going off to mute your notifications? Thank you. Who is that?
Oh,
Right in the middle of me giving a nice compliment. Anyway, no, I just wanted to say that, really, folks have been, so accommodating, so welcoming. They're very welcoming to visitors. They've been, not holed up in the office. They have been roaming the building. They've been accessible to people. So I just wanted to say that I have noticed, a significant change in, both the approach and the morale, it seems, in the department. So just want to say thank you to both of you.
Thank you for recognizing that, for mentioning it. It's very true. Our police officers, they're fully sworn law enforcement, and they're also acting in some ways as tour guides. When someone walks into the front lobby and there is no tour guide, one of our officers greets them and asks them where they're from, and they're doing a job too. They're assessing what's happening in the lobby. So there's a reason for it, but we are very, very fortunate to have this team here that embraces it. They all come to the State House for a reason, and part of that reason is because they appreciate the building and what's happening in this building. So I won't get into the security programs for 2025 because we talked about that the last Jlmc meeting, but they've been very busy planning and prepping for that. The PAGE program is off to the races. It was the part of my job I was most scared of, was going through the PAGE applications and picking the pages. I didn't really change anything from the way that Janet had done it. The doorkeepers really took a lead on that. And I'll say I spent most of my time, I shared this with the speaker, I spent most of my time, not with the applications of the kids that were selected, but with the applications of the kids that were not selected. And boy, were they amazing. So it's very hard to tell a bright young person that they didn't get accepted to the position. It may be their first encounter with what feels like serious rejection. And so I worked really hard with the team to soften that blow as much as possible. We have a group of 21 pages that will be coming in. They had their orientation last weekend. They're very excited. And you'll be seeing them on the first day of session. The post office is back. That's the picture in the lower left-hand corner. So we pulled that out of the basement of the Supreme Court, and it's in the lounge. So we're gonna try it. It used to be in what was the coat room, which was room 9. Now it's back, it's in the lounge. It's all labeled, it's ready to go. And so you'll be seeing that in there. And I think you were in the lounge on the day that we were bringing it in, and you may have even consulted us on placement.
Give you a few pointers.
How do you go?
Yes.
It was very, very responsive.
Yes, yes. College internships, we have a new school in the building, Norwich. So there can be, just so everyone knows, there can be any number of interns in the building at any time. A legislator can engage with an intern and have it not be part of a school or a program. But when it's something like UVM or Norwich and they're sending large amounts of interns our way, we try to formalize it with an MOU. And HR, the House Clerk, the Senate Secretary, Bryn, we work to create an MOU so that expectations are clear for both the legislator that's accepting the intern and the intern themselves. So this is the first year that we have Norwich officially on board with an MOU. I think they'll be sending 8 students our way. And then myself, I've been assigned the duty to be the ADA coordinator for the legislature. We have a lot of services that we provide upon request, and an ADA coordinator is somebody who can kind of pull the threads together and help to deliver services in a way that not only meets everyone's needs, but I would say exceeds everyone's needs. And as a sergeant at arms, I think it's a great place for the ADA coordinator to rest, because so much of what I do is building related, is about access. I work with the Capitol Police who run into ADA issues, or people bringing, for example, pets into the building or dogs into the building. So it's nice to have it all here. And I've started my training to become fully fluent in all things ADA. All right, next slide, please. So now we're moving into the busy time of year session prep, and it's so great we're in room 11 because you can see how messy this place gets in the off session. So this is all HVAC stuff over here. This room has basically been used as a corridor for the HVAC system. This closet over here goes all the way up to the crow's nest and has been used for the majority of the summer and fall as a way to get materials out of the crow's nest and out of the building. So room 11 has been really heavily used this summer and fall. So too have so many parts of the building. And I asked Janet, and I've asked David Sheets, and I've asked the directors, is it always this messy before session starts? And they say yes, but this year it might be just a little bit more messy than it normally is. So we're fully going down into the sprint for session prep. The committee assistants are here. They're in their committee rooms, kind of cleaning them up. They've already been cleaned or about to be cleaned by Mike Metcalf and his team, his custodial team. Working very closely with David Sheets, the state curator, over the next few weeks to finish up the cleanup work. That picture in the center there is of the restoration company. They're in the House chamber. It just happens to be this morning. They're in there doing their yearly annual work, going through the entire building, looking at every piece of furniture, every painting, everything to make sure that this building, which is also a museum, is ready for the start of session. On December 18th, the building will be closed. We're going to do our annual fire alarm testing, which includes a lot of stakeholders. It's many hours of the fire alarm going off. I don't recommend being in the building that day. That's why we're closing it to the public, but it will be loud. On that same day, I believe, or that week, we're taking the house, BGS is taking the chandelier down in the House chamber to replace all the light bulbs. And I mention that just because it's possible you don't know that kind of work happens before session. Every light bulb that works in this building is, and there's one that doesn't work, is because there's someone looking after it. And the House chamber chandelier is complicated. In fact, it's missing a couple pieces of glass, which that same team in the center, Meeting House Restoration, I believe is the name of the team, are having the pieces of glass replicated. And so those should be in place before session starts. Can I just mention, one of the things that made me laugh was when they take the chandelier down to replace it, they say they always find rubber bands in the chandelier. Does everyone know this? Everyone knows this, okay.
Yes.
So it must be a game that someone plays to see, and someone's pretty good at that game because there is a collection of rubber bands.
I was gonna say bats.
Recycling.
Yeah.
Separate issue.
So that is pretty much the update, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Agatha. Any questions? Clearly, there's been a tremendous amount of work to keep this building up, functioning well, but also preparing for session. And there's been a lot of transitions happening. And so I just want to say thank you to all of the staff and everyone who works in this building to make sure it's as smooth as possible. We see that. Thank you.
I think also having some public space again for meetings and public hearings is, really gonna be welcome. That's been something that has been compromised, I think, as a result of COVID. So getting those additional committee rooms, set up, I think, and the space sounds really wonderful. So that's a step forward. I know Senator Sears wanted me to say that.
Yes. As well as the earlier comment about the size of the house.
All right, all right. All right, I'm gonna go over here to Representative Shaw and then Representative Wood.
So in the cafeteria,
Mhm.
entryway, lounge, whatever we call it, outside, the space outside, what's that little room for that's all taped up?
It's related to the mezzanine project.
Okay.
So there's pipes that run through that wall that have water in them that need to be worked on to get the bathrooms and the mezzanine functional. And the team, because it's such a public part of the building, HP Cummings was nice enough to build a little room around it instead of having like plastic tenting around the whole
I was
thing.
afraid you were gonna put Mike in there.
No.
Representative Wood.
Around the ADA accessibility and, appreciate that you're, going through that training and everything. I'm just, forethinking, and, I know I have, a couple of issues coming up with the, around accommodations being needed for, witnesses. And so do I contact Mike or you or, who?
We have a form online.
Okay,
And they can call if computer itself is an access issue, but the form online is really great. The person can fill out when they're coming, where they're planning to go, and what accommodations they think that they need. And then depending on that, we work with Kevin and Mike to satisfy the request.
okay. I think that's something probably all chairs should know, in terms of making it, our building,
Yes.
more accessible for people with disabilities.
And Kevin and Mike are educating me on it because they've had this process going for a long time. And what I've learned from Kevin is that the place on our website where we would make the request is a standard place, and Kevin jump in, is a standard place on websites for people who are used to making these requests. So it's easy for them to find it. It's exactly where they're expecting the request form to be.
Okay.
Is that true?
That's accurate. Yeah, and it's also in a couple of additional places, for convenience purposes for those who aren't used to taking those.
We can make sure that goes out to chairs when we come back in the building and committee assistants as well. As a reminder, absolutely do that. Any other questions for Agatha? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, members, that wraps up our last meeting of the Joint Legislative Management Committee for 2024. Thank you so much for the discussion today around the budget, and have a lovely holiday and be